lighting isn't the best and it's a little gloomy and lonely here compared to the rest of the scenery, but that's how the majority of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was written, isolated and depressed amidst a world that was otherwise more than ideal. Now Gothic elements are found all throughout the book, and for all of you who are confused, we aren't talking about the creepy girl dressed in black at the back of your class. Gothicism was all the rage in the 18th and 19th century, and much more captivating than some of today's trends like SoundCloud.
Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang.
Anyhow, books like Frankenstein and many others are great examples of this. These books tend to have a gloomy, depressing feel to them, a lot of isolation used in them, and have this uncertainty about them as to whether or not the main character is good or bad.
Within Frankenstein, Shelley often references the work of her husband and family. But perhaps the person who affected her work the most was her mother, feminist, philosopher Mary Wollstonecraft, as feminist ideas are present within the story. The men in the story, especially Victor, show traits that could be considered stereotypically masculine, such as ambition, confidence, and independence. And the women in the story, such as Elizabeth, show stereotypically feminine traits, such as empathy and compassion, which are often looked for in nurturers. However, rather than making women's vulnerability seem like a weakness, Shelley almost portrays it as a strength, which is evident in the personality characteristics of the monster, who basically embodies what is considered hypermasculinity. He's aggressive and violent to a point that most would consider dangerous. Through the monster, Shelley shows that the presence of femininity in a man's life has good effects. For example, when the monster asks Frankenstein to make him a female version of him,
could you make me a woman?
He explains that with a female companion, his evil passions well fled, for I shall meet with sympathy. When he says this, the monster means that with a feminine presence in his life, he will no longer feel the need to be so aggressive and violent, which, as I stated earlier, were characteristics of hypermasculinity. He also wrote about women's healthcare, specifically fields like mental and reproductive health, through the relationship between Frankenstein and his monster. Throughout the book, when Victor is creating the monster, it's alive! It's alive! It is described like a pregnancy, whether it be the duration of time it took to create the monster or how he felt while creating it. Then after the monster has been created, Victor begins to exhibit symptoms that are similar to postpartum depression, such as depression and suicidal thoughts. Along with this, Shelley also touches on the subject of abortion, which occurs when Victor is creating the second monster. Upon realizing that this new monster could only bring more chaos or destruction,
what are you doing?
He decides to destroy the monster when he is only partially finished with it.
Monster theory is used in Frankenstein to help prove that Victor is the true monster along with society. Elements from Cohen's monster culture can help prove this. Thesis 7 states that people are the true monsters.
I'm the monster.
This is displayed when society judges the creation based on his appearance alone, making them the ones that are truly evil and full of monstrosity. They also push him into the aggressive behaviors that he ends up with. The other main points from the theory are Thesis 3 and Thesis 6 that support the ideals of the monster being Victor. Thesis 3 states that the monster is not entirely different from the normalities of society, which perfectly relates to Victor as he is one with the humankind. Passion was something that many men had at this time towards discovery in the world, but Victor takes his passion to a whole new level and becomes engrossed with it all, separating himself from the rest of society. The final way that monster theory is used is that Victor gets to do things that others might feel envious of doing, but civilized behaviors keep them from doing so. This is supported by Thesis 6 of Cohen's monster theory, which states that the linking of monstrosity with the forbidden makes the monster all that more appealing as temporary egress from constraint. Wanting fame is desired by almost all, and discovering mind-bending things about life itself can be envied too. One may wish that they could get away with creating an animated, lifeless being, but society's opinion on that would be great, keeping those who don't possess such monstrous qualities from doing just that. Contrary to this, Victor finds himself not obeying the civilized manners that he was raised by and leaving the boundaries that characterize him humane.
It's not a phase, Mom.
Like the monster, Victor is corrupted by society. At the beginning of the novel, he starts off as a scientist in the quest for knowledge. However, the power of his ambitions takes over him, turning him into a narcissist who only cares about his own passions and image. After committing certain dreadful actions, such as creating the monster and letting Justine be convicted of a murder that was the monster's doing, he accepts his wrongdoings, yet does nothing about it. He resents himself for doing this. However, he does not have any motivation to change, because his overpowering driving force is passion, fear, and fury. The monster is a creature that was created by Victor, pretending most of his qualities. At first he is pure, for he does not know the true world of man. But over time, with the lack of interaction and exclusion from society, he begins to feel worthless. He blames others for this feeling because they outcasted him. He had the chance to be like a human, but they morphed him into a bitter creature. He struggles with feeling enjoyment and tortures himself with hate. He then takes these feelings against himself and projects them on those who feel the same. Elizabeth is a fair young woman who is seen as something greater than human.
I'm kind of a big deal.
Her features are that of a deity. She is seen as pure. However, after her mother dies while taking care of her, she becomes tainted with her death. For in the eyes of Victor, she killed her. Throughout the book, she becomes more corrupt, feeling responsible for the downfall of her loved ones. At the end of the book, she loses her heavenly vivacity, developing dark features and eyes. The symbol of darkness often represents the heavy toll one's weaknesses has on them, such as Victor's fear of the creature he created and the grief that he causes others, including himself. This darkness also obscures the idea of these weaknesses, covering the source of it. However, the feeling they cause still remain. In contrast to the symbol of darkness, the symbol of light emphasizes the truth, both good and bad. This is shown when the lightning strikes, illuminating the beautiful scenery and the monster. Victor does not like the light, for he does not like the truth of what he has become, or what he has done to others. However, at first he was mesmerized by the light. This is when he was in the field of science, on a great quest for knowledge.
We're going on a trip in our favorite rocket ship.
For this knowledge is factual and truthful. However, as time went on, he learned to despise it, for what his quest to knowledge made him do. This pulls the concept of bad things corrupting good, which is a large part of Gothicism.
Water is also a prominent symbol in Frankenstein. Water represents calmness and tranquility, and the ice that often covers it in the story blocks the characters from reaching it.
Ice, ice, baby.
Whenever Victor retreats to the water for deep contemplation in the story, he never goes into the water. He's always on a boat, and it's like if he enters the state of calmness he once had, he'd die because of it. Which is exactly what happens at the end of the book, while on the sea of ice somewhere very far up north, he does end up dying once the ice splits.
The last part of Gothicism we've yet to mention is the whole duality and uncertainty throughout Frankenstein, where we don't know whether our two main characters are in basic terms good or bad. So when the book first starts out, Victor Frankenstein doesn't seem too bad, and contrary to most people's beliefs, Frankenstein himself is not the monster, at least not the one we see all over Party City during Halloween season. Actually, he creates the monster who most of you who have not read Frankenstein are thinking of here. Back to the point, he then starts to push himself away from his family and become more and more selfish, which ultimately leads to his and his family's demise. But towards the end, he starts to feel sorry for his actions, yet it was already too late. Almost exactly the same happens to the monster he creates. The no-name monster starts out fine, almost infant-like, as mentioned before. But then society gets a hold of him and corrupts him, and this is where things get interesting. He then starts to despise people and goes on a big murder spree to get revenge on Victor, to make a long story short. But through this, the monster feels just as bad as Victor. So who really is the monster? We don't know until the end of the book.
Sometimes the world no longer needs a hero. Sometimes what it needs is a monster.
If you're still confused about Gothicism, here's one more book to compare it to, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now this book has a lot of Gothic parallels to Frankenstein. They both include the whole uncertainty in whether or not the characters are either heroic or villainous, and have elements of the supernatural dealing with the preternatural. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll is both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And one represents good, that's Dr. Jekyll, and one represents the bad in man, which is Mr. Hyde. This is more or less seen in Frankenstein between Victor and his monster, with Frankenstein representing his corruption through knowledge within his monster. So again, we don't know which side is the better side. Then, the whole supernatural element is pretty self-explanatory, because in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you can't transform into another person by just drinking an elixir. And in Frankenstein, you can't just assemble random body parts and animate them. So the authors make it as close to as possible as they can to making it seem realistic, but ultimately it's not achievable, which is another part of Gothic.